This is the home of Dalma Brunauer, and as it looked in June of 1988. This is his wife, Dalma.
You got it, huh? In the end, we compromised. We took down half of this tree.
Oh, half? That's better than losing the whole thing, I guess. The house is located at 39 Chestnut Street in Potsdam.
Some of the engineering departments are, and Robert Livingston Clarkson Hall, which used to be the chemistry department, and some other science departments before they moved up to the hill. Now this is also engineering. Stephen had his office here when he first came to Clarkson as chairman of chemistry and also as the head of the Colloid Institute. And then as we move on to the right, we come to one of the sandstone buildings. This is called Old Main. This was the original, the oldest Clarkson College building. Yeah, they call it now Old Main, and this is also engineering. And then down a brick building at the end of the street is the student union called also Louis House. And across the street is the house with the raw sandstone facade is Snell Hall. That houses the administration building and the School of Business. In the few first years, my office was also there for liberal studies, or as it was then called humanities. And on the right, these are just dormitories now attached to Snell Hall. Behind Old Main, which you don't see, are the offices of the Faculty of School and Science, where I had my offices at toward the end. When we got the mark, this building goes back to the late 1890s, I think. 1896 or something. They put us from the liberal studies faculty recently, the last 5 or 6 years. What you're looking at now is called Snell Hall, after Burt and Snell, one of the people associated prominently with Potsdam. And this is now the administration building, and also the School of Business is located here. Professors of Humanities used to be housed here, and for many years, this was my office also. It's overlooking the square. I liked it. These are some of the oldest dormitories on what used to be known as the Hill Campus. Well, I guess they still call it the Hill Campus. This is Hamlin and Powers. And behind it there are several more, and there is a rather nice hilly wooded campus there where we can house our students. Up on the top of the hill is Schoolcraft House, which used to be one of the original Clarkson residences. I guess the trees are covering it up, so because of the Science Center, so-called. It's called the Cora and Bayard Clarkson Science Center. You remember the Robert Livingston Clarkson Center? That was the member of the Clarkson family who lately took interest in Clarkson University. And his wife, Cora, and their son, Bayard, have taken a very active interest in Clarkson. They've donated this building, and then Bayard is presently chairman of the Board of Trustees. He's a medical doctor living in New York City. What you see here is a panoramic view of the Adirondacks. Stephen's office used to be directly under where we are standing now. Clarkson family members and all their relatives were buried, and they made it open to the public, so it's one of the nicest cemeteries, I think, that I've ever seen. Off to the right, you can actually see the Clarkson Science Center. Fires, and the DeForest fires, the Presbyterian Church. They are just behind us. Very nice. Should have brought some water to water those geraniums. They're getting a little droopy. My mother's grave is over there, and see if it's brought this whole lot here for the family. Can you see it? Across.
Okay. I have it.
The story of this statue is Stephen was always a great admirer of St. Francis of Assisi. And a friend of ours, an old gentleman by the name of Joe Turi, or Venturi as he sometimes calls himself, is a ceramicist, a ceramic artist. And they have a summer home in Lake Placid. So one day we were visiting them, and Stephen liked this statue very much and said he wanted to buy it. And Joe said, no, he won't sell it because it has a crack in it, but he's going to make a new one. And I thought to myself, this is an old man, you know, what guarantee do we have that he will have a chance to make a new one? So I said, I tell you what, I'm taking this until you make the new one, and then you can have it back. And we carried it away, and sure enough, Stephen had it in the living room. And then when he died, I thought he would enjoy having this, and Joe never made another one, not to this day, although he was here at the grave and saw it. But he has not yet come up with a new one, so we'll just have to have it as long as it lasts. And the books, the great books, the great literary and other classics of the world. Here is the physical absorption of gases and vapors. He had 2 copies of it, in the end, the Oxford and the Princeton edition, and he gave the Princeton edition to Ego Matievich. He felt that he should only keep one. And this is the Russian translation of the same book, this one here. And then the Kendall Award Symposium on solid surfaces is here. Then on a bookshelf, which I presently have in another room, he had the books that he admired, such as the complete works of Winston Churchill. He had the great books of the Western world and other books that showed his general interest, for instance, the commentaries on the Bible and other books that he cherished. Then he also had many of the works of world literature, but he was particularly fond of art books. And he would be very distressed if he saw how untidy this shelf looks, because that was one thing. He never got tired of arranging and tidying up. He always liked his books to be just so. And so these are all art books, and then there are literary works. There is the complete Burt series and history of the world, the story of civilization. His books about Einstein occupied almost the whole shelf. He had books on philosophy, on theology, world literature, and many others. And I'm afraid they got somewhat out of sequence in these 2 years since he is gone. So this is a part of his background that I think should be known. The room where you are staying upstairs was his own bedroom, and he also kept some of his favorite books and paintings up there. A wedding picture, then the one that was taken on the 25th anniversary of our wedding, our silver wedding anniversary. And this was the picture that 3 of us with my mother, when we went to the Holy Land, was taken in Bethlehem just before Christmas. Trips to Hungary. We went to visit the Herend porcelain factory, which is in the western part of Hungary. And it's quite old. It's over 100 years old, or maybe even 150. And when we visited it with Feri Tamás, they gave us a plaque of the factory in porcelain. And we also saw another one that we liked very much, and we wanted to buy it. I wanted to buy it for him, and they said no, it was not for sale because it was the only one of its kind. But when I explained Stephen's association with that person, then they gave us that in as a present. And here are the 2 plaques without illumination, and you can't see very much. When you turn on the light behind it, you can see that it's an excellent likeness of Albert Einstein. Stephen didn't have very many things on his wall, and he never liked to brag about his accomplishments, but his association with Einstein was a continuing source of happiness and joy to him, and so he always kept us in our living room together with a copy of the letter that Einstein wrote to him, which he had framed and had on the wall. When we will go upstairs, I will also show the inscribed copy of Einstein's theory of relativity and a few of his other treasures that he mostly kept hidden. One of the things that he kept as a souvenir was an early computer chip from 1954, which is inscribed in Hungarian, the first 5 years in America, May 28, 1954, and it says Puli, which is short for Pulvari. And Pulvari wanted to show his gratitude to Stephen by presenting him with this fruit of his first 5 years in the United States. He's now a professor emeritus at the Catholic University of America. Then here is one of Stephen's most prized possessions, The Meaning of Relativity by Albert Einstein, and inscribed on the inside front page, saying simply and modestly, as Albert Einstein, 1945.
Yeah, this is focusing well on the...
It will not?
Can you hold it up to the
Sure.
window?
Yeah, we can turn on the light. Does this help?
One down a little bit in the light.
Of the many distinctions that he received, one, or rather two, that were always on his bedroom wall were these two: the Chemical Society of Washington's Hillebrand Prize certificate and the American Chemical Society's Kendall Award certificate. And hidden in his drawer were also his Navy Commendation ribbon with his dog tag, Navy dog tag. He had the buttonhole of it, which I gave to one of the daughters. And he also asked for his Phi Beta Kappa and Sigma Xi keys. Here's also the medal, maybe we need more light on that, from this is the medal that the Hungarian government awarded to him at the time that he went to Hungary and was so helpful to the then recovering Hungarian scientific life. And better, what do you need?
More light.
More light on this. And it's inscribed in Hungarian, a magyar, just a minute. A magyar tudósok támogatásáért Commander Brunauernek Tildi Zoltán, means because of the support he gave to Hungarian scientists, to Commander Brunauer, Zoltán Tildi, who was the president of the Hungarian Republic at the time, and was given with apologies that it was only bronze because that's all they could afford. And then his certificate of recognition from the Institute of Colloid and Surface Science, 1985, and it was one of the last things that he received. And then, of course, his honorary doctor's degree certificate from Clarkson in 1969. I mentioned this thing from Tildi, and I think I showed you the pictures. I don't know whether would they show up in a video. I doubt it. Thomas, his doctoral hood and cap, the flag that was on his casket, plus some of the things that he liked very much and kept always on his dresser. The statue, a bust of his little boy, Louis, who died at the age of 3.5, and this statue was made by a Washington artist by the name of Frank Epping, whom he and Esther had befriended, and he made this. The St. Francis statue was a present from me. The little Hungarian flag, also a present from Pulvári, who didn't want Stephen to forget his Hungarian roots. There was his Bible, and this little Roman lamp, a clay lamp, was I think from the 1st century, and this was also given to him in recognition by the Hungarians in 1946. It's an original Roman lamp. Then we had the letters, you see.
Okay.
This is the Einstein book, The Meaning of Relativity, published by Princeton, and on the inside cover it was simply and modestly signed A. Einstein, 1945. And as you pointed out, in real ink, because before it dried, the book was closed and the ink was pressed on the other side. Also, among his treasures were the this letter from the President of the Hungarian Republic. At that time it wasn't yet called the People's Republic, just the Hungarian Republic. And it says, August 6, 1946, Dear Commander, I was informed and also by experience I know how deeply you became absorbed in Hungarian scientific problems and how energetically and productively you intervened on behalf of the material support of the Hungarian scientists. Will you accept my heartiest thanks and appreciations? And I would feel deeply indebted if after your return to the United States you would kindly continue your benevolent work with regard to our problems and worries, for which the Hungarian nation will be profoundly grateful. Yours very sincerely, Tildi Zoltán, President of the Republic of Hungary. Also, here is a list of photographs, or a group of 3 photographs, which were taken on the occasion that the American Military Cemetery was dedicated in Budapest. And in the first picture, Tildy is shown being led up to the rostrum under the American flag, and Stephen salutes the flag. In the second one, he is standing there in reverent silence as the minister is performing the ceremony. And in the third one, the whole American military contingent is shown with just the 3 Navy uniforms among all the Army uniforms. As a result of his trip there, several, I think 6, outstanding scientists were brought to the United States, including Zoltán Baj. The others were János Faragó, László Kovásznai, Charles Pulvári, and 2 who have died, 2 who have also died since, George Pup and Patai, I forget his first name, who was also the husband of the distinguished pianist Ági Jámbor.
Why don't we try the first one again?
This first picture?
Mm-hmm.
Was I holding it at the wrong angle? Or what?
No, it's... Okay.
Okay. Next to the letter of Einstein, I think the thing which gave him the most source of happiness was the Order of the British Empire. This is a copy. The original I gave to his daughter Betty. And this is the full size, except that the borders were trimmed on the copy. And it was presented to him in Washington by, I think, the ambassador from England, from Court of St. George, I should say, and it was signed by George V and Queen Mary, the Queen Mother, who was the Grand Master of the Order of the British Empire. It says, George VI, by the grace of God, of Great Britain, Ireland, and the British dominions beyond the seas, King, Defender of the Faith, Emperor of India, Sovereign of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, to Lieutenant Commander Stephen Brunauer, United States Naval Reserve, greeting. Whereas we have thought fit to nominate and appoint you to be an honorary officer of the military division of our said Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, we do by these presents grant unto you the dignity of an honorary officer of our said order, and hereby authorize you to hold and enjoy the said dignity and rank of an honorary officer of our aforesaid order, together with all and singular the privileges thereunto belonging or appertaining given at our court at St. James's under our signed manual and the seal of our said order this 28th day of November 1945, the 19th of our reign, by the Sovereign's command, Mary R. Regina, the ambassador, grant of the dignity of an honorary officer of the military division of the Order of the British Empire to Lieutenant Commander Stephen Brunauer, United States Naval Reserve. Beauty, and I will look up some of the pictures of that too. But as I was going through his papers, I thought I'll pull some of these letters. At the time of his retirement from active duty in the Navy, James Forrestal, the Secretary of the Navy, wrote to him saying, the Secretary of the Navy takes pleasure in commending Lieutenant Commander Stephen Brunauer, United States Naval Reserve, for services set forth in the following. And here's the citation. For outstanding performance of duty as Technical Administrative Officer of the Bureau of Ordnance, from October 23, 1942 to the present date, demonstrating initiative and technical ability in developing a carefully planned research program, Lieutenant Commander Brunauer was instrumental in adopting new high explosives for use in underwater ordnance weapons and anti-aircraft projectiles. By his organizing ability, keen scientific analysis, and devotion to the fulfillment of an important assignment, Lieutenant Commander Brunauer contributed to the successful prosecution of the war and upheld the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. A copy of this citation has been made a part of Lieutenant Commander Brunauer's official record, and he is authorized hereby to wear the commendation ribbon. Let me find just the exact date. The memorial Saturday, November 1st, 1986, a memorial service was held in his honor here at Clarkson. And the day after that, or on the Monday after that, a letter came signed Ronald Reagan, President of the United States, which says the United States of America honors the memory of Stephen Brunauer. This certificate is awarded by a grateful nation in recognition of devoted and selfless consecration to the service of our country in the armed forces of the United States. Or talk about it, sure.
Yes.
This item was Stephen's real pride and joy. During the years that he had an office at Clarkson, he never had anything else on his wall, none of his diplomas or certificates of different honors that he received, but he had this framed copy of two letters which represented his success in recruiting Einstein for the United States Navy. The letter on the left is by Einstein, and the one on the right is by Adelot, who was the head of Princeton's Institute for Advanced Research. And these are, of course, not the originals. These are photocopies, and the originals were left in the Navy archives when he left the Navy. You want me to read what it says, or you know? I think you can make it out quite well.
I just want
That's okay?
to get the number in the bottom.
Oh, I see.
If you tilt it a little
Like this? The other way?
top back towards you.
Top back towards me?
Mm-hmm.
The letter, both of them are dated May 17, 1943. And the one from Einstein reads, Dear Lieutenant Brunauer, I have your kind letter of May 13th and have discussed with Dr. Adelot, Director of the Institute for Advanced Study, the matter of my cooperation with the Research and Development Division of the Navy. Dr. Adelot approves heartily of my participating in your research operations. He and I both feel that the individual contract would be the most suitable, and I agree fully with the arrangements outlined in the enclosed letter from Dr. Adelot. I very much enjoyed your visit and look forward with great satisfaction to this association with you in research on Navy problems. I shall expect to receive from you in due course the contract and information about the work which you wish me to undertake, and I hope that I shall be able to make some useful contribution. In this connection, I should like to raise one question. Would it in any way interfere with my usefulness to the Navy if I should spend a part of the summer in a cottage at Lake Saranac? I do not know whether it will be possible for me to take a holiday away from Princeton in any case, and certainly if my usefulness to the Navy would be increased by remaining in Princeton, I should be most happy to do so. If, however, it would be equally convenient for you, I think I could probably work to better advantage in the more agreeable climate of Lake Saranac during the hot months of the summer. Yours very sincerely, A. Einstein. And it's addressed to Lieutenant Stephen Brunauer, Bureau of Ordnance, Navy Department, Washington, D.C. And Stephen was always very much struck by the modesty of Einstein, asking for the permission of a humble lieutenant to spend part of the summer at Lake Saranac. And incidentally, even though he gladly gave us permission, it was never actually used, and Einstein remained at Princeton and worked very hard all through the summer months. Then the letter from Adelot is also to dear Lieutenant Brunauer. Professor Einstein has told me of his conversation with you and showed me your gracious letter of May 13th, suggesting arrangements under which he might be of assistance to the Navy for theoretical research on explosives and explosions. In talking over the matter with Professor Einstein, he and I have both come to the conclusion that probably the best arrangement would be for the Navy to make an individual contract with him on the basis of $25 per day. Professor Einstein, to let you know at intervals the amount of time he has actually spent on Navy problems. Not a very quiet time or place. I think it is important to leave in the arrangement for an assistant in case a great deal of routine work should be necessary, although Professor Einstein cannot tell at this time whether or not he will need the services of an assistant, and I believe he didn't. I take the liberty of writing to you simply to say that the Institute for Advanced Study cordially approves of this arrangement with Professor Einstein and looks forward with pride to having him undertake this service for the Navy. Believe me, yours very sincerely, Frank Adelot, Director. Which is better?
Left.
This is better, okay.
Okay.
Of all the things that Stephen accomplished in his life and all the things that happened to him, what he cherished most was his association with Einstein. One of the cherished souvenirs of his life was this book, The Meaning of Relativity by Albert Einstein, which Einstein personally presented to him and signed it in his presence. He didn't write a dedication into it. Stephen thinks he was too modest to make too much of it. The association started when Stephen wrote to Einstein and asked him for an interview first, and then Einstein agreed, and as a result of their discussion, Einstein joined the United States Navy as a consultant. Stephen described this episode in an article that was published several places, including in the proceedings of the Washington Academy of Sciences. I have here a framed copy of the two letters which he always had on his office wall. These were the only things he ever kept on his office wall, not his degrees, not his diplomas, not the other citations, but these two letters, which were written, both of them, on May 17, 1943, and they were from the Institute. They were an Institute for Advanced Studies stationery. These are, of course, not the originals. These are photocopies. The originals were kept by the Navy. It says, May 17, 1943, Dear Lieutenant Brunauer, I have your kind letter of May 13th and have discussed with Dr. Adelat, director of the Institute for Advanced Study, the matter of my cooperation with the Research and Development Division of the Navy. Dr. Adelat approves heartily of my participating in your research operations. He and I both feel that the individual contract would be the most suitable, and I agree fully with the arrangements outlined in the enclosed letter from Dr. Adelat. I very much enjoyed your visit and looked forward with great satisfaction to this association with you in research on Navy programs. I shall expect to receive from you in due course the contract and information about the work which you wish me to undertake, and I hope that I shall be able to make some useful contribution. In this connection, I should like to raise one question. Would it in any way interfere with my usefulness to the Navy if I should spend a part of the summer in a cottage at Lake Saranac? I do not know whether it would be possible for me to take a holiday away from Princeton in any case, and certainly if my usefulness to the Navy would be increased by remaining in Princeton, I should be most happy to do so. If, however, it would be equally convenient for you, I think I could probably work to better advantage in the more agreeable climate of Lake Saranac during the hot months of the summer. Yours very sincerely, A. Einstein. And this is addressed to Lieutenant Stephen Brunauer, Bureau of Ordnance, Navy Department, Washington, D.C. Then, on the same day, a covering letter came from Dr. Adelat, which says, Dear Lieutenant Brunauer, Professor Einstein has told me of his conversation with you and showed me your gracious letter of May 13th, suggesting arrangements under which he might be of assistance to the Navy for theoretical research on explosives and explosions. In talking over the matter with Professor Einstein, he and I have both come to the conclusion that probably the best arrangement would be for the Navy to make an individual contract with him on the basis of $25 per day. Professor Einstein, to let you know, at intervals, the amount of time he has actually spent on Navy problems. I think it important to leave in the arrangements for an assistant in case a great deal of routine work should be necessary, although Professor Einstein cannot tell at this time whether or not he will need the services of an assistant. I take the liberty of writing to you simply to say that the Institute for Advanced Study cordially approves of this arrangement with Professor Einstein and looks forward with pride to having him undertake this service for the Navy. Believe me, yours very sincerely, Frank Adelat, Director. Among his papers when he died were several that he cherished, and I'd like to share some of them with you. Here is a letter from the President of the Hungarian Republic, not yet the Hungarian People's Republic, And it's in English. It's addressed to Commander Stephen Brunauer, Budapest. And this is what President Tilde wrote to Stephen. This is dated the 6th of August in 1946. Dear Commander, I was informed and also by experience I know how deeply you became absorbed in Hungarian scientific problems and how energetically and productively you intervened on behalf of the material support of the Hungarian scientists. Will you accept my heartiest thanks and appreciations, and I would feel deeply indebted if after you return to the United States you would kindly continue your benevolent work with regard to all problems and worries, for which the Hungarian nation will be profoundly grateful. Yours very sincerely, Déli Zoltán, President of the Republic of Hungary. I have also here 3 photographs. I don't know how well these will come out, but it's worth trying. These were taken on the occasion that the American Military Cemetery was dedicated in Budapest. And Stephen, still in uniform, was leading President Tilde to the rostrum, accompanied by several members of his cabinet. And all the American military personnel were standing at attention. Just 3 Navy hats here among all the Army hats. And also reverently listening as the minister is saying his prayers. In 1946, Stephen received a letter from the Secretary of the Navy when he retired from active service. At that point, then he became a member of the Naval Reserve. James Forrestal, Secretary of the Navy, wrote to him, the Secretary of the Navy takes pleasure in commending Lieutenant Commander Stephen Brunauer, United States Naval Reserve, for services set forth in the following. And there's a citation: for outstanding performance of duty as Technical Administrative Officer of the Bureau of Ordnance from October 23, 1942 to the present date, demonstrating initiative and technical ability in developing a carefully planned research program. Lieutenant Commander Brunauer was instrumental in adopting new high explosives for use in underwater ordnance weapons and anti-aircraft projectiles. By his organizing ability, keen scientific analysis, and devotion to the fulfillment of an important assignment, Lieutenant Commander Brunauer contributed to the successful prosecution of the war and upheld the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. A copy of this citation has been made part of Lieutenant Commander Brunauer's official record, and he is authorized hereby to wear the commendation ribbon. Just 2 more of his many interesting papers. Some of the recognition came from the King of England and the Queen Mother, Mary. This is actually a copy. The original document is large. It has much wider margins, and it's on regular parchment, but I gave that to his daughter Betty. So this is a copy of the correct size of the text itself. It's signed up here, George Rex Imperator, King and Emperor, George VI, by the grace of God of Great Britain, Ireland, and the British dominions beyond the seas, King Defender of the Faith, Emperor of India, and Sovereign of the most excellent order of the British Empire, to Lieutenant Commander Stephen Brunauer, United States Naval Reserve, whereas we have thought, whereas we have thought fit to nominate and appoint you to be an honorary officer of the military division of our said most excellent order of the British Empire, we do by these presents grant unto you the dignity of an honorary officer of our said order, and hereby authorize you to have hold and enjoy the said dignity and rank of an honorary officer of our forced order together with all and singular the privileges thereof took belonging for appertaining, given at our court at St. James's, under our sign, manual, and the seal of our said order, this 28th day of November 1945, in the 9th year of our reign, by the Sovereign's command, Mary, Regina, Grand Master. These were some of the papers that he cherished. This came the day after his memorial service in November of 1986. Since the United States of America honors the memory of Stephen Brunauer, this certificate is awarded by a grateful nation in recognition of devoted and selfless consecration to the service of our country in the armed forces of the United States. Ronald Reagan, President of the United States.
From Clarkson University. Today we're talking with Dalma Brunauer, Clarkson's first female full professor, a woman of international reputation who this year retired from the university, but still maintains a very active personal and professional schedule. Professor Brunauer, let me ask you first of all to give us a little bit of a teaser. Tell us a little bit about who the woman is who retired this year and what she's been doing over the last few years for Clarkson University.
I had a very monotonous life. Ever since I was 18 years old, I was involved in education, went to the university. I taught a few years in Hungary, came to the United States in 1949. I have been teaching ever since. And I had some interesting highlights. I taught on educational television in Chicago, used to have my own radio programs. I wrote a lot, published a lot, traveled a lot, but mostly I was here at Clarkson teaching and being involved with all the activities that university professors are involved with.
How many papers have you actually written, delivered, and published in your life?
I think I know I wrote more than 100, not counting the journalism pieces I did in Hungary. But I gave over 70 formal lectures on scholarly and related fields.
All over the world?
All over the world, yes, on every continent.
And so can you tell us a little bit more about your background, the early years in Hungary?
Well, I was born in Budapest, Hungary, and I went to school there. I finished my middle school, which was called gymnasium in Hungary, and I was almost bilingual by that time in Hungarian and German. And then I picked up English and did my doctoral work in English and American literature. My doctoral dissertation was on Willa Cather. I was the first Hungarian to have written a doctoral dissertation on an American author. I'll tell you more about that later. Then I was very active in the student government when I was a student. And I think our students here at Clarkson would be interested in what university politics were like in those days, because it was very much involved with world politics. Right after the Second World War, I was a member of the student government, and I ran on the Christian Democratic Party. It was the first and only open election anywhere in Eastern Europe, because we defeated the communists so badly that they caught on that they were not as popular as they thought. And our victory, which was an absolute majority, even reached the Western press, and we got a special blessing from a pope. You can imagine that. So I had a really interesting and fascinating life as an undergraduate. Then I started to teach, and then I had to leave the country.
So when and why did you decide to leave Hungary?
Well, it was beginning to look as though the choice was between that and going to jail or to prison.
Why was that?
Well, my journalistic activities were mostly for the Catholic press. And this was the time when Cardinal Minsanti was very much in the limelight, and there was a lot of pressure put on students and teachers to make open demonstrations against him. They knew that I was associated with these Catholic journals, so in my classrooms and in the school where I was a boarding school supervisor, there was a lot of spying and blackmail and threats going on. So my health was undermined, and I found that it would be to my advantage to leave the country. So then I went to Vienna. I escaped. It was a very adventurous escape through the Iron Curtain, climbing out through the barbed wire. And I ended up in Vienna and then in Innsbruck, Austria. Spent altogether about 10 months in Austria before I was admitted to the United States as an immigrant professor. I have been teaching here ever since. I was actually invited to come to the United States, but the Hungarian authorities didn't give me a passport. That's why I had to escape. So when I arrived in Chicago, I started to teach almost immediately.
Who had invited you to come to the United States?
DePaul University in Chicago. It was at that time the largest Catholic university in the country in 1949. And it was a bit funny because my field being English, I myself found it a little bit quaint that I should be teaching English. So I volunteered that maybe I should try something else, but my dean, who was a psychologist, said, look, you're going to do fine. That the only reason I'm not a world-famous psychologist is that I don't have a Hungarian accent. So that's what I have been doing ever since.
So you've been teaching English?
Yes, English, American literature, and then of course I branched out into world literature and the humanities in general. So my last title before I became Professor Emerita was Professor of Humanities.
And what year was it again that you came to the United States?
1949, at the very end of 1949. Then in 53, I left DePaul University and went to teach at the University College of the University of Chicago. And also simultaneously, I started to teach at Lewis College, which is now Lewis University in Lockport, Illinois. And about 5 years after that, I went to work for the Chicago City College. And it was there that I had that very rewarding and memorable experience of being involved in educational television.
Well, how did that come about in the first place? You were already teaching English in Chicago.
I was teaching English and humanities in Chicago. The Chicago Board of Education at that time was the umbrella organization under which the Chicago City College also operated. It did not have its own board. And there was this Chicago City Junior College, as it was then called. It then became Chicago City College. It had 8 branches, no tree, only branches. And one of the branches was called the Amundsen-Mayfair branch. I was teaching there, and the president of the college came to me and asked me whether I would like to be a teacher in this pilot program on educational television. Apparently I was recommended for it by people who knew me. And the 9th branch was the so-called TV college. It had its own dean, its own administration. And it was really a very worthwhile experiment, because the way they did it was the following. One professor was given the assignment to develop the course completely from scratch, was given the whole summer off at full pay to develop the course, and then taught it either in the fall or the spring term. No other teaching duties, and even had a full-time assistant. So that meant that those courses were really well planned and very well taught. Now, I had 3 kinds of students. By the way, the station which projected these programs was WTTW, Your Window to the World, Channel 11. You're familiar with it, from having been from that area. And it was received in a 4-state area: Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Our average viewership was about 1 million people per telecast. Most university professors don't reach that many students in a lifetime. Now, there were 3 kinds of students. There was the public at large. Anyone could tune in, because it was an open circuit television. But we also had full credit students. These full credit students enrolled regularly. They bought the study guide, they bought the textbooks, and they were expected to pass examinations. I won't go into how you test that many people, but it was done.
How many people enrolled in a class like that?
I'd say it was on the average close to 1,000 people per one class. And well, myself and my assistant, we had to develop a multiple choice type of question, set of questions. We gave 3 tests, 2 midterms and 1 final, and as well as a term paper. And between us, we had to read those 1,000 papers.
That's
That was
really
a part
quite an assignment.
That was part of the job, yes. But they were very interesting. As I was telling you, some of the people who took the course for credit, that was really interesting, because there were some students who took it in the classroom as an educational project. This was an experiment. Most of them who took it for credit were women, a few men watching it at home and sending in their assignments by mail. And there was one group which we called our captive audience. These were the students in the state correctional facilities, both males and females, who were given this privilege as a great incentive to good behavior, because if they didn't do well in the course, they went back to making license plates or whatever else they were doing. So I had very motivated students.
What was the first class that you taught on public television?
Actually, it was the same class I taught all the time. It was called World Literature in Translation. And it was given live, and then it was repeated from tape, and it was again given live and repeated from tape. It was updated from time to time, but it was the same course. And you may ask, how do you teach world literature in one semester, right? That was quite a problem. But finally, I came to the conclusion that the best way to do it would be to deal with the most interesting, most significant, most lasting questions that the thinkers and authors of world history in the Western world have been dealing with. So I divided all of world literature into 6 subject matter areas, and I dared anyone to come up with a 7th, and they had to do with areas like man and God, man himself, man and fellow man, man and nature, man and his imagination, and man and society. So those pretty well covered whatever the literary figures were dealing with. And so within that, I asked questions like, where do we come from? What is the creation myths in literature? Or let's say, requited love, and love poetry and love literature about love, or man and history, and what is man's relationship to the historical forces around him. And there was one unit toward the end which had to do with the greatest of the great books, which was the Bible. And I still remember the first time I taught the course, I had my then fiancé, Stephen Brunauer, as a guest, because even though he was a chemist, he was very much interested in religion and the Bible. So he helped me, and we were exploring why the Bible is the greatest of the great books. And in the end, I said, dear students, we've heard a lot about surprise endings in literature. Well, I have a surprise ending for you. Dr. Brunauer and I are getting married tomorrow. And somebody said, what is she going to do for an encore?
Who were the writers that you chose to teach?
Now, it was called World Literature in Translation, so that immediately eliminated the English language works. But some of the major authors that were included were, of course, the great classics like Dante and Cervantes, Balzac, Ibsen. Just to mention a few, there were very many poets. And there were some historians like Thucydides. I had some of the Greek dramatists, naturally. And naturally, I sneaked in a few Hungarians.
I was going to ask that. For those in our audience who might know who might not know who some of the more famous Hungarian writers are, could you mention a few?
Oh yes, especially because one of them came up very close to the end, was the next to the last lecture, which was called, within the utopian framework about the perfect society. I had 3 units on the perfect society. One was, had to do with true utopias, which were presenting a worldview that would be perfect. Then there were the anti-utopias, the voices of doubt and despair, such as Čapek and so on. And finally, I used the Hungarian author Imre Madách, M-A-D-A-C-H, and his Tragedy of Man, who had effected a reconciliation. He showed some of the worrisome and frightening aspects of mankind's future. 100 years ago, he already anticipated space flight, regimented society, pollution, and many other ills and innovations of our age. But in the end, he showed that mankind was going to return to sanity and to learn to live in peace. So that was the Tragedy of Man was one. There were several Hungarian lyric poets that I included, including Kosztolányi, about whom I later wrote a book, Attila József, Gyula Juhász, János Arany, and one or two others.
Well, as you were teaching this class, you're obviously reaching over 1 million people. You mentioned that a few minutes ago. Most teachers and professors in schools these days get student evaluations. What kind of response did you get from the people who were tuning in to take your class?
Oh, I had most heartwarming and encouraging responses. Fan mail came in by the sackfuls. I have quite a few scrapbooks that I put together, and I still correspond with some of the former students.
What kinds of things did they have to say? What did they like about the program?
Well, they liked the fact that, how should I put this? They liked the whole organization of the course very well, because instead of just expecting them to read a book and remember facts about it, they were forced to think. Let me give you an example. On some of the term papers, term paper topics which I handed out were topics pertaining to liberty. And you can imagine, for instance, how some of my captive audience felt about the question of crime and punishment. That's another one. Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment was in there. How they felt about crime and punishment and the whole question of liberty versus incarceration. I had responses along those lines. Many people liked the fact that I had interesting guest speakers, and not only just speakers. I had someone who danced a creation myth, for instance, a professional dancer. I had poets reading from their poetry. I had translators telling me what the problems of literary translations are, and such guests as this. What can I say? I had a lot of responses when I made my announcement about my impending marriage, I can tell you that.
And it sounds as though your audience was a highly motivated audience.
Very much, yes, and they felt very close. One thing that they stressed again and again is that educational television is a much more personalized instruction than ordinary classroom instruction, because the professor is right there in the living room and seems to be talking. They were able to pick up the phone after each teleclass and talk to me in the studio if they wished. So we had to leave our home, not our home number, but we had a number, the studio's number, and if they had any questions they could ask. We also had conferences scheduled with them so that they could come there, and of course in the case of the correctional institutions, we had to go there. They would have liked to come and see us, I'm sure, but we had to go in there and talk to them about their questions and problems.
I understand that your excursion into the mass media wasn't limited to simply television. You were involved with radio also, is that right?
Oh yes, I had a lot of work in radio in Chicago. First on WGN, there was a regular Hungarian literature program. So I was very often, almost I might say regularly, asked to participate there, reading Hungarian poems and talking about matters of interest. Then on WIND, which at that time was the largest commercial radio station in Chicago, I had 2 radio programs, regularly scheduled ones. Now, the way that came about was that after my first TV program, there was such a favorable response that I was picked by the Board of Education to have this first series, which was called A Way with Words, and then which was a bi-weekly series, and then they had the second one, which came every week. I like to describe it as a kind of a educational disc jockey, which may sound funny, but the way it worked was that the recordings of the spoken word, which were very popular in those days. I don't see so many of them now, but in those days, people like Dylan Thomas and so on have put out recordings of their poetry. Also, there was a program called John Brown's Body, a beautiful dramatization with Judith Anderson and Tyrone Power and Charles Boyer and Charles Lawton. So these things were available on recordings, and in order to introduce those to the radio audience, I was given the assignment to introduce them, which meant not only that I would play selections from them, but comment on them, had to provide suitable musical background, and in general make it interesting to the audience, so that they might be interested in buying those records and listening to them. So that was most of it. Then also there is a program in Chicago, it's still going on, FMT. It's best, to this day, it's best educational and cultural program. And the famous Stutz Terkel interviewed me a number of times, both on his almanac and his wax museum.
I understand he's really quite a character.
He really is. He really is. When he called me and said he wanted to do an interview, I just almost passed out.
What did he want to talk to you about? That's very interesting.
He wanted to talk to me. Well, I had several programs on him, but the first one I did for him was, believe it or not, on Hungarian folk songs. He found out from, I guess, Pete Seeger, whom I also knew quite well, that I had a collection of Hungarian folk songs, some of which I collected myself. And he wanted me to give a full hours program. I was singing them too. Don't ask me to sing now. But I was singing them, and he was asking me questions about them, and it was a very good program. Then when I went to Hungary on a longer visit, he also interviewed me about my experiences there. I was on his program several times.
Before we move away from Chicago, when you came to the North Country, let me throw you a little curve and ask you what you learned and discovered about the United States when you moved here from Hungary.
Well, some people asked me whether I was ever homesick, and I had to say truthfully that I wasn't, because it's very easy to get used to the good life. When I came to Chicago in 1949, of course it was one of the high periods in American history. Life in Chicago was wonderful. The freedom, the cultural atmosphere. I mean, that was the time of Second City and Museum of the Art Institute. There were shows, theater, ballet. The New York City Ballet came every year. The Lyric Opera in Chicago was great. There was a lot of cultural ferment. But the thing which made the greatest impression with me was how friendly and open the people were. The students were responsive too. I really can say that in all the years I taught in the Chicago area, I had a very good rapport with my students.
Chicago is a very ethnic city. Was that experience important to someone coming from Eastern Europe to the United States?
In the beginning, I'm sure it was important, because even though I knew the language, it meant a great deal that I could eat Hungarian and talk Hungarian, and there were Hungarian churches and Hungarian clubs, restaurants, music. Yes, it meant a lot. I certainly probably wouldn't have felt so much at home if I had been cut away from all of that.
And one more quick question about Chicago and the United States. What are the differences really between Hungarian literature and literature in the United States that you've perceived since you've moved here?
I'd say that the greatest difference is the role of lyric poetry in the life of the Hungarian nation. The Hungarians have always resonated with lyric poetry in a very significant way. The children already from kindergarten on or before are taught poems by heart. And it's not considered a chore, it's not considered a burden, it's considered fun. And the schools encourage this, the families encourage it. If a child gets invited to a family party, the child is expected to be able to recite a poem. It just goes without saying. So we all grew up with poetry. And as a result, we quote it easily and are very much at ease with it. I think that's the single greatest importance. The other is, I think that we are much more aware of literature in translation, because Hungary is a relatively small country and is surrounded by cultures speaking in different languages. There is a constant exchange of literary traditions across the borders as well as from all over the world. Many, or I should think most of the new books that are published are almost immediately translated into Hungarian. Also, the theater life there is very vivid. And when I was there on a Fulbright in 1984, there were simultaneously 18 different plays playing just in Budapest alone, and most of them straight from Broadway. I saw Evita with Tom Rice in attendance on opening night. You know, La Cage was being played, couldn't get tickets to it, and almost anything that's on the American or the British stage is immediately brought to Hungary. Also, there are 3 opera houses in Budapest alone. So that was, I think, the greatest difference. But in those days, we also had to deal with political censorship. So when I came to the United States, a great plus was the fact that here I could read anything and did not have to worry about censorship.
You're very involved with television, and you used it as a great teaching tool when you were talking about the tradition in Hungary of children learning lyric poetry. Not much of that seems to happen in the United States. Do you think that that's a problem that's a result of television?
I don't think so. I think it's a result of the philosophy which developed here largely, I think, to a misunderstanding of John Dewey, that you know, we teach the child, not the subject, and it was considered a burden on the child to be expected to memorize. We just got away from doing any kind of memory training, and it was believed that if you expect a child to learn poems by heart, that was a hardship. I always thought it was great fun. I always memorized more poems than I had to.
You had a very long and fruitful career in Chicago, many years. You know that. What took you away from Chicago and brought you to the North Country?
In 1965, my husband reached the age of 62, and he planned to retire at age 65. He received an invitation to come to Clarkson as chairman of the chemistry department and also to head up the Colloid Institute, which was just then being founded. So he thought he would come here for 3 years, and after that he will retire. I took 3 years leave of absence from my job at the Chicago City College. That was 22 years ago. So as you can see, we liked it here.
You must have.
We liked the friendly atmosphere of Potsdam, the cultural attractions, such as the Crane School of Music, and in later years now Music Theater North, of which I'm a board member and have been very much involved with almost from its beginning. We have many friends in the churches and at the schools. And we like the easygoing life, the clean air, good beaches. And
this might be an appropriate point to ask a question that I hope will interest you. Many people go to work and just do their jobs and go home and watch television for the rest of the evening and do something else. You've never been like that. You've always been involved with outside activities. You want to talk about some of the things you've been involved with other than just teaching in the classroom?
Well, we did a lot of travel. I mean, that might be one of the answers. I don't know whether you wanted to talk about what we do on everyday occasions, but I always did a lot of writing and research. But travel was our main form of recreation, and we've been on every continent and lectured there, visited. We have been invited to homes all over the world, and that was very gratifying. Otherwise, we like to read, we like to go to concerts and theater if we get a chance, and do writing.
And you've been involved not just in literature, but also in art.
That's right, yes. And so visiting museums and art exhibitions is always a fascination. I have taught art here, and I guess the main reason why I was chosen for that, even though I'm not an art historian, is that I've been to just about every major art museum in the world and have seen most of the works that are described in the art books firsthand.
Clarkson University today is really a very different place than it was when you came here over 20 years ago. What was Clarkson like in those days?
Well, we came here in 1965 for 3 years. And at that time, we did not have even quite 2,000 students, if I remember. And conspicuous by their absence were women. I was, for many years, the only woman with a senior appointment. I came as an associate professor. There were never more than 2 or at most 3 women who were assistant professors, librarians, and other in similar jobs, but there were never any other senior professors here for the first 15 years or so. Then when I came, do you know how many girl students there were here in 65? 9.
9?
9. That was only the second year that women were readmitted. You may know that there used to be women here at the turn of the century, and then that was dropped, and so in 1964, the first few women were admitted, and so when I came, there were 9, and then they gradually went up to 20 and 60 and 200 and so on.
What kind of challenges did it present to you being essentially the only senior woman faculty or staff member here?
Well, once before we sat down, you asked me why I picked Willa Cather as my topic, and this might be relevant here. Once she said that she had 3 ambitions in life. One of them was to do well in the men's world, to be accepted as an equal. And another one was to remain a lady. And so it's always interesting to try to reconcile those contradictory goals. You try to remain a lady and still do well in a man's world, and this is what I try to accomplish also.
And obviously you succeeded because you came here as an associate professor, but...
Well, then I got promoted.
And you became Clarkson's first and only female full professor.
Full professor, right.
What year did that happen?
That happened in 75. 75, I received my promotion. So sometimes people ask me, you know, what led to that promotion, or how were those promotions achieved? Well, at Clarkson, for men or women, there are the same criteria. We are expected to be able to balance teaching and research, and perhaps as a subsidiary, we also are expected to take part in university activities, whether extracurricular or not. And I tried to fulfill those requirements. First of all, in the teaching. When I came, we still taught 12 hours, including Saturdays. That's changed eventually. But I always had a very good rapport with the students. And whether we taught the great ideas, as we now do, or earlier, the world literature course, I felt that what we had to offer to the Clarkson students was important and stimulating, and it had something to do with making them into complete human beings. That's what the humanities is all about. So I always took my teaching very seriously. But also the research. Now, starting with Willa Cather, it was easy enough to maintain an interest in her organize a symposium on the national level when the centennial of her birth came around in 1973, to publish articles about her and so on. I also had a long-standing interest in Thornton Wilder. I organized a national symposium at the time of his death. I had a small correspondence with him, which I cherish. Murasaki's influence was important in my life also, and at the time of the millennium of her birth, I organized a triple symposium at the Modern Language Association about Murasaki herself, the role as a woman author, and also in the role of non-Western religions in world literature, because that happened to be one of my major areas of interest, literature and religion. So that was in San Francisco. I held offices in national organizations. I was secretary of the Conference on Christianity and Literature. Also, I was a board member of the American Hungarian Educators Association and in several other organizations. So having had this national and international recognition certainly helped in gaining me a promotion. And after I was promoted, I continued along those lines. My husband and I went on a trip around the world in 1977, and I was an invited visiting professor at the Tokyo Women's University in Tokyo. Also, I gave a lecture at the Tokyo Women's University. I gave a lecture at the India International Center. And in Hungary at the same time, there was the Congress on the Mother Tongue, on which I spoke about educational and academic opportunities for Hungarian-born scholars in the United States. That was very meaningful to me because the building in which that lecture was delivered was the same building in which I had taught when I was forced out of Hungary due to the political situation. So it was a kind of a meaningful return for me.
What persuaded you when you were young to study English, and more specifically Willa Cather?
Well, English was my major, and it was almost an inspiration for me to take English. I could have majored in German or in Hungarian or psychology, in which I was also very much interested. But somehow I felt that intuition, if you wish to call it, that I needed the English and that somehow this would be involved with my fate. I knew always that I wanted to be an educator. Not only my mother, but her parents were both educators. So I come from a long line of teachers. But English, it just had to be. It was my fate. I had to do it. Now, when the time came for me to choose a dissertation topic, I was determined to choose an American author because my interest was very, very strong in American culture already. But when it came to deciding whether I should take Thornton Wilder or Willa Cather, I know that the fact that Cather is a woman cast a deciding vote. I guess I must have been a feminist even back then.
Well, in some ways, she's a woman very much like you, isn't she, in terms of the challenges you were talking about earlier?
I hope so. I hope that I resemble her somewhat.
Have you patterned yourself after her consciously?
I don't think so. For one thing, of course, she never married, and I did, and that makes a great difference. She consciously stayed away from marriage. She felt it would interfere with her work, and so that is a lack in her, which I'm glad I didn't have to share, because I had 25 years of very happy marriage.
Looking back over your long career in English literature, and particularly American literature, do you remember the first English language book that you read?
Well, we studied Hamlet in school. I think that was the first complete work that I read. But the first book that I read on my own was Llewellyn's How Green Was My Valley, that I read completely in English. I read many books in translation. Of course, that's not what you meant, right?
No.
You meant, but what did I read? Yes, How Green Was My Valley. That was the first novel I read. I must have been about 16 at the time.
Well, how have your interests developed from that point? You started with Willa Cather, and you've been a Cather scholar for many years now, as you were saying. Who else have been your interests in?
Well, I mentioned Wilder, I mentioned Murasaki, then the Hungarian authors, Dezső Kosztolányi, about whom I wrote a book, and another Hungarian author, Frigyes Karinti, I received a Fulbright Senior Fellowship in 1984 to go to Hungary and do research on him, which I did. I still have quite a bit of work to do before a complete book will come out of it. But he wrote a lot, so it will be a big job. Who were some of the other authors? Well, among the more than 100 papers, if I would flip through the list, you could see that I could maybe indicate some of the major research areas. They were American literature, particularly Cather and Wilder. Then I published on Styron. The Confessions of Nat Turner was one of my more important papers. Then I was interested in literature and religion, and I was an officer of the Modern Language Association's division of religious approaches to literature. In fact, I helped organize that division. And in that connection, I chaired and organized a session on Albee and Beckett and the theater of the absurd from a religious point of view. Then I did, another area of mine was the Hungarian literature, in which I still continue to publish. And there were other authors. For instance, I've always been interested in Somerset Maugham, and my latest publication, which just came out a month or two ago, is about Maugham's religion. The title of it is, let's see, The Road Not Taken, The Hindu Path to Salvation in the Razor's Edge. So there again you have the religious and the literary aspects combined.
And so you've been to 6 of the 7 continents, and I guess maybe you only haven't lectured in Antarctica, is that correct?
Well, we traveled a lot. If I total it all up, I'm sure that it would be more than twice around the world. Been to Scandinavia, the Soviet Union twice, all of Western Europe, but we didn't miss too much of Western Europe. The Greek islands, Egypt, Turkey, been twice to Istanbul. Then when we took our trip around the world, it was Japan and India, Thailand, Iran. I'm sure I missed some. Hong Kong, yes, Hong Kong, Istanbul, and so on. Back to Hungary. We were in South America. One of the last trips I took with my husband was to Brazil. We went to the Holy Land. That was a very meaningful trip. The Bible really came to life to me in that meeting, in that trip. It was in '83. So as you see, we haven't missed very much. I still haven't been to China.
How has your traveling shaped the way you teach world literature and the way you teach students?
The students have often told me that it brought things closer to them. I take a lot of pictures, and I often illustrate my lectures with slides. So that always helped, and I can show them souvenirs and scrapbooks from my trip. So that has shaped it too, particularly, of course, in the art course, where I often illustrated my lectures with pictures that I took myself right on the scene.
Mm-hmm. Someone might think it's a little unusual for someone of your talent and ability to be teaching at a school that has a reputation for being essentially an engineering and technical college. Has it been a rewarding experience for you to deal with students who are primarily interested in areas other than what you're teaching?
That's a difficult question to answer, because I sometimes felt that perhaps I could have accomplished more professionally if I had gone to a liberal arts school. I can't say that this never crossed my mind, but it was a bit of a mission, see, as I mentioned earlier, to humanize the students, to tell them that to be a complete person, the profession that they chose could not be their whole life. They would be very dull citizens, very dull marital partners, very dull members of families if they had no interests other than their chemistry or their engineering or their management problems. And I'm not saying that every student responded to that, because obviously that wouldn't be true. But many of them did. And I noticed that in particular in my art classes, that feels a real need here at Clarkson. That it's a tie between their workaday life, because it has many technical aspects, especially the architecture, but it also gives them a larger horizon. And I'm trying to make them into educated museum goers and art connoisseurs, and that I feel has been very successful.
Have you had experiences with these students who maybe have never been in a museum before,
Oh,
who've taken your class and gone away and come back?
Many. Oh, I have gotten postcards from all over the world from students who have done just that. They went to St. Peter's in Rome, and sent me a postcard and said, now I know what you've been talking about.
Do the students who are in your classes who are really interested in engineering and science bring something special to you also? I know that you've taught them a lot.
Naturally. I mean, every human interchange is meaningful. I myself have always been interested. I mean, not only was I married to chemistry for 25 and a half years, but having come from the kind of educational background that I had the privilege of having in Hungary, I was no stranger to it. I had a more than average background in the sciences, and so I didn't feel that there was a communication gap between my students and myself in that area.
C.P. Snow talked in a very famous book about two cultures,
Yes.
the arts and humanities and the science. Do you think that still holds up today, or is that gap narrowing?
No, I think he was somewhat prejudiced there. I never could quite agree with him. To some extent, yes. I mean, he felt that the scientists know more about the arts than the artists know about the sciences. I felt that was a little bit unfair. Many of us in the arts try to remain educated in the sciences as well.
Well, I know that there's a serious move afoot, as we see here at Clarkson, to do more about educating people in technical areas about the arts and about literature. Do you think there needs to be more done in American culture to introduce to art and literature students more about the sciences?
That would certainly be a good idea. That would certainly be a good idea. I'm sure that the more we know and understand about each other's fields, the better we are. There is one area, too, at which concerns me, and that is the increasing neglect of the foreign languages, which is also in the field of the humanities. I don't feel that a person who has not been exposed to a second language in depth, I mean, not taking two courses of undergraduate German or something like that, but to be exposed to another language in depth, to have an opportunity to travel, to read in another language. I still read German without a dictionary. This has really helped me, and I think it would help every student if we were to stress foreign language instruction more than we do.
How many languages do you speak?
Well, I only speak 3, Hungarian, German, and English, but I'm always learning. Whenever I go visit somewhere, I always pick up some language tapes, and if possible, I try to acquire a teacher before I went to Japan. I wanted to be able to read those funny signs in the subway, so I would know where to get off when I was traveling from the place that we were allotted to live in at the university, at the technical university, and the place where I had the visiting scholarship. I had to be able to travel, and so when we went to Brazil, I picked up a little bit of Portuguese, or when we went to Spain, I picked up. One of my undying ambitions is to learn Chinese well enough to converse and to be able to order a Chinese meal. Unfortunately, I'm learning Mandarin, and most Chinese restaurants talk Cantonese, so it hasn't been very successful. But in Hong Kong, I was able to order a meal in Chinese. It was one of the great accomplishments of my life.
Well, speaking of great accomplishments, I know that outside the classroom, you've made a great contribution, done a lot of service for the university too. Do you want to talk briefly about a few of those experiences that you
had? Yes. I was particularly involved in 2 areas. One of them had to do with the honorary degree candidates people like Eugene Wigner and Harry Levin of Harvard. It was wonderful to be able to talk to them and get to know them well. And the other had to do with lectures, and this is important, you know, bringing in outside people to lecture here. The former Prime Minister of Hungary was invited by me and talked here, and we were impressed by him. There was Sir Bernard Lovell, the great astronomer. I'll never forget that lecture, and several of these. So I think my work on these various committees that invited lecturers will be among my most lasting contributions.
And one last question for you. What lies ahead now for Dalma Brunauer? It sounds like you haven't really retired.
No, I haven't. I'm working on a very ambitious project now. I'm trying to write a novel.